Welcome to BeyondBIM. Today I have the pleasure of sharing with you an interview with Dr. Bilal Succar. He is a figure that in the BIM world many of us will be aware of, largely from his extensive research that is community-based. Bilal is a strategic consultant who holds extensive experience in the domain of digital transformation, BIM, information management, and performance assessment. He is the founder of the BIM Excellence Initiative and also the head editor for the BIM Dictionary, and most known for his research in the fields of competency-based learning and macro BIM policy development. He has established the Change Agents AEC, an open innovation consultancy, which he uses to assist organizations in their digital transformation efforts. But today, in my interview, I delve together with him into the topic of digitization, BIM policymaking, and his latest research work together with his community called the LITE framework. His open innovation approach has helped shape much of the research into BIM adoption in industry and at a global scale. The BIMe initiative is led by esteemed professionals and researchers from across the world. It now holds about 145 volunteers as of January 2020. Much of his and his colleagues' work has helped lay the groundwork for the macro adoption policy, international competency benchmarking, and integrated information platform projects. At the core of these is an online BIM dictionary, which has now been translated into 23 languages and hosts hundreds of commonly used terms covering digital transformation descriptions, acronyms, and synonyms. Research is exciting, challenging, and arduous at times, but in our discussion, Bilal highlights that limited change happens without the help of a community. For him, research is largely enabled through a community of other enthusiasts as well as serious researchers. And now, without any further ado, let's hear what Bilal has to say on the nature of digital transformation and the future of policy making. What was it that initially got you interested and started within BIM and digitization of the built environment in general?
Sense of frustration, to be honest. I was working as a consultant at an architectural company, and I'm trying to understand how to improve the deliverables. Okay, so my background is a bit kind of a mix. I studied business administration, didn't like it. Studied fine arts and interior design, finished that, then started architecture management at, master's, and then focused on, shifted to information management, BIM, etc., but focusing on performance improvement. So really, as I'm doing this, I'm working as a consultant. And every time we have a discussion about transformation, the discussion just goes into hundreds of different directions. And just got me really frustrated. I can't get to a result because you start discussing about, software, and they start discussing training. And then you start discussing training, they talk about classifications and talk about, incentives, and we should wait for the government to move. And really the discussion didn't ever go anywhere. So I thought, okay, there's something here I don't understand. One is, what are we talking about here? Discussing BIM and digital transformation. What is it really? And second, how do you convince people or encourage them to move forward? And is there better ways of encouraging people to move forward than others? Is it always about ordering them, giving them that kind of a requirement to move, or is it about incentives, or what is it? And who should you talk to? When you're trying to convince people to move forward, is it the boss? Is it always the top guy or the top lady in an environment, or is it bottom up, as they call it? That started it, and started investigating it. And here I am, 15, 16 years later, since I started research.
And so at the moment, so you're the founder of BIM Excellence, and this is a consultancy group or something more?
Actually, the work started as a consultancy. My company's name is Change Agents, and BIM Excellence, or BIMe, is a method for competence assessment for performance improvement. As I started, it was fully proprietary. Just I used it in my consultancy. Okay, and then I started to understand that this wouldn't work as such. It wouldn't have the effect. It may have some improvements within a single company, but the scalability of it doesn't really work. So I started opening up my work through publication and through releasing of documents outside publication. So much of the research I do gets released in different ways. Some of them peer-reviewed, some of them as resources, etc. And so I started something called the BIM Excellence Initiative, or short BIMe Initiative, which is really the not-for-profit side of BIM Excellence. Okay. So anything which has a BIMe initiative, it means it's under Creative Commons, okay? And up till this point, anything was called BIM Excellence, or you go bimexcellence.com, that's more proprietary, more like business, okay? The line separating them is, if I'm working with a company, an organization, helping them, and they're, paying me, that's, for profit, of course. And anything beyond that, like helping individuals, helping policymakers in education, that's all BIMe initiative. That's how it started, okay? And I was on my own. But also then doesn't have the right effect if you're working on your own. So you have to work with others, So the question came, how do you work with others? Who do you work with? What do you work on, okay? And this BIMe initiative started to take its current form because it had a false start back in 2009, didn't really work. And past 2-3 years, it had the restart. Had like a detailed knowledge structure. What is a community? What are the projects we work on? Et cetera, et cetera. So the current form of the initiative is like that. It's not for profit. It has a very strong, or let's say robust knowledge structure. It has, detailed ways of working and delivering.
Okay. And so, but on top of that, I believe that you're also one of the initiators of the BIM dictionary.
Okay.
Yes?
The dictionary is one project within the initiative. So the initiative has 6 projects. Okay. So project A is the BIM dictionary, is the most mature project. It's the one that reached what we call the product phase. So what you see now online is the product resulting from lots of work in the background. There is another 5 projects. There's project B, which is knowledge organization. Okay. There's project C, which is not launched yet, which is about competency and learning, not launched. Project D, which is about performance improvements within organizations, not launched, because this is what I move all my business to the online, to the not-for-profit side. So this is going to happen soon. And project E, which is launched, which is about macro adoption and policy, trying to understand if mandates work, and project F, which is just launched, still in the theoretical foundation stage, which is about information management. So to summarize, the dictionary is one project which complements all other projects, but that's the one that people see because it reached what we call the tool stage. Okay, that's the maturity in the project itself. The others are still in the foundation and conceptualization, may have reached template stage. Okay, eventually we'll get to a tool stage. Once it gets to a tool stage, people will see it and benefit from it, as they do with the dictionary.
And these other projects, are they also something that are co-created with others from industry?
Yeah, now the initiative has nearly 140 people now. They come from more than, I don't remember the number, but more than 40 countries. They range from a professor, like a professor emeritus or a professor active professor, or to a undergraduate student, really interested in this topic or these topics, for research. So everything we do now is a community based. What does that mean? It means that my role now is just to make sure that things are stay connected, but the actual work is being done by all these different, beautiful knowledge sharing individuals from across the world who find that there is a need to work together in a community rather than an institution to deliver knowledge in a way that people can use, okay, to offer tools and templates and terms, etc. But so it is co-created for sure.
Okay, wow. No, that's really interesting. Well, obviously, as you said, BIM Dictionary has received or been seen by most of us because it is now at a stage where it can be used. And you've managed to have all of these terminologies translated from even from Estonian, which I'm really happy because I speak Estonian and Finnish as well.
Great.
So it's really nice to see that there's been so much momentum behind it from so many people across the world.
Yes, and this is one of the things that has been learned, if you want, the hard way, meaning identifying who do you work with. Okay, you don't want to work with people who are being paid to do work. To be honest, that's the worst person you want to work with if you are, only encouraged by the check. Okay, what you get out of it. You want to work with people who are passionate about the topic they're working on. Okay, they have a common interest in discovering what's the solution for a problem. Okay, so once you find these people, at first it was difficult, now becoming easier. The work becomes so easy. So easy. It becomes like self-propagating. You say, okay, we have this problem, we have to fix it. Oh, they bring in solutions, they bring in their other colleagues, etc., and it grows. So really now we are in a stage in the initiative was always still small, less than 150, but we are throttling the growth because we don't want to grow too fast. But when people see what we're doing, this and the people who see the passion embodied in a specific topic and they want to join, they want to join in, and we're trying to manage this growth so people don't come into initiative without us being ready for them, because we want to prepare. Even if you're passionate about a topic, it's not enough. Passion is very important. It's the most important criteria, but you need to have a structure to express your passion in a way that other people benefit from it and does not contradict with the other groups. So we're taking a little bit our time in our growth.
Okay. Yeah. And so now let's move on to the main topic, which of course is BIM. And with all of your work done to date, and as we've seen BIM being adopted across the world, many governments have pushed for the same mandates or initiatives as what the UK has done. We now have EU, most of EU countries have done the same thing as well. So what have you kind of come to realize as a result of these mandates? Does it actually work in practice, as we've seen here in the UK, where we've had a little bit of a struggle with some of the uptake? So do you foresee that mandating this is the right way to go about it, or should it happen more organically?
This is a really important question, comes up again and again. And this was one of the motivations for Project E, which is the fifth project I mentioned, which is a macro adoption project, which is like any other project. It starts with research. Okay, so peer-reviewed research published. Then we build, community around that research, and we do work, deliver tools, and in this case, assessments. So for that project, and just as a background to qualify what I'm going to say, is that we've done 26 countries. Okay, so we look at 26 countries at different levels of detail. Some of them was consultancy, like Inter-American Development Bank, contracted my company, and was I hired some of my friends specialized in this, and we delivered a study for them about some aspects about macro adoption in Latin America. Based on all this, 26 countries, and now we're going to launch again for 50 countries, is we learned a lot. When it comes to mandates, what we learn, and this we're going to be releasing in the near future, is no single type of mandate. When people say, should we have a mandate, not have a mandate? One should stop and ask, what do you mean, really? Do you think the mandate in the UK is similar to the mandate in Singapore? It's not. Do you think in Chile is the same as in Brazil, next door? No, it's not. So there's many different types of mandates. Now, if we want to judge mandates as a whole, like look at it as a single type, which is hard, we could say that it is a very blunt tool. It is needed, but it is not does not on its own work. it has to be coupled with many other things for it to work. We can discuss, of course, because based on the data we collected, we can discuss different types of mandates and what works, what doesn't. But to answer you more directly, unless a mandate is coupled with incentives, with education, and with community, encouragement, community-based work, the chances of it working is very low. Actually, in some places, we found that the mandate had a negative effect, where the mandate was, you
Which
could say,
countries?
For example, let's say in Asia, okay, without naming the country, when faced with when the government said you have to move into BIM as specified within 6 months, okay, and it wasn't prepared, the market wasn't prepared. It caused the sprouting of service providers who deliver according to the mandate without any real change in the company. Meaning you have to, let's say, submit models in, let's say, IFC, okay? And they're not ready. And they have to meet that mandate because you have to work with the government.
Yeah.
A third party comes, looks at the 2D drawings, generates that model for them, okay? And they submit it to meet the requirements of the mandate. That's actually bad. Why? Because it's fake progress. It is a mandate that was not well thought, causing a disruption in the typical supply chain, creating new roles that weren't needed, keeping the performance of organizations at wherever they were before, okay, and added another player which is not necessary. It's just crazy, So not all mandates are needed. Not all mandates work. So we have to be careful when we're discussing mandates to put it in perspective of the environment it's applied and how the mandate was applied.
So trying to patchwork the mandate might not necessarily resolve the original problem, is what you described. So you're saying that it requires some incentives, as you said as well. So what kind of incentives would that be? How would that look like?
Okay. Now, if to encourage macro adoption, and this is a published study, with my colleague Professor Mohammed Qasim from Northumbria, we identified 8 things that a policymaker needs to look at in order to encourage adoption. Okay, systemic adoption. One of them is having objectives, the clear objectives, and we're not just saying go adopt level 2. What does level 2 mean? Or go and give me full BIM, or go and give me a digital twin, or go and give me this. What does it really mean? What are you really mandating? Another, whether there's a driver in the market. Meaning, depending on champions doesn't really work. And many countries have a mandate without drivers. Like a policymaker would say, I'm going to mandate BIM, but there's no task group or force or whatever you want to call it, driving, and with multiple champions, as if you have multiple drivers taking it in different directions, you need to have a very robust framework of legal issues. You have to have very robust educational framework to connect academia with industry. You can't just have, let's add BIM into the curricula, just having a couple of master's degrees is considered enough. No, of course it's not. You need to have, process inventories and product libraries, etc., etc., etc. Now, when it comes to deploying all these different components, you have a choice as a policymaker. Either you want to prescribe it, or you want to force it, or you want to incentivize it, okay? Or in like some countries, they just do a laissez-faire. They don't do much. They just inform the market about change, and just through that providing information, they hope for change. Okay. Now, for policymakers who are a little bit more forceful, or we call them assertive, they typically take 2 routes. Okay. One is define what BIM is and force everyone to follow. Say this is levels and you have to be that level, or these are the stages or phases. Another would say take more about incentives. Incentives will take the shape of tax breaks. It will take the shape of payment for training. You see that example for example, in Singapore. You'll see it in Quebec and in Canada, different. And some of them combine them. Okay, so there's many ways of implementing this. But what anecdotally we could say now, because we don't have all the data needed, that unless a clear vision, clear objectives, availability of a driver, and incentives combined with a general movement in the market, adoption may not succeed.
And in the case of Australia, what is the adoption looking like, and what is the policy making looking like there?
Okay. Now, I'm not a specialist in Australia, although I'm based in Australia. I try to focus on common problems and common solutions, and I try as much as I can as a researcher never to think of myself as an Australian researcher, because I think that's one of the pitfalls of research, to think local. We should always, think global as much as we can and act local. In Australia, if we have a very mixed, picture. Picture is not clear. You see, at federal level, we don't have any mandates at all. Nobody would accept a federal mandate anyway, but we don't have one. At state level, different states have different approaches, but they all stop at informing and encouraging. There's no clear mandate. The difference would be, rather than looking at countries, whether here in Australia or elsewhere, is to look more at sectors. Okay, so for example, here in Australia, different sectors have different adoption rates. So, for example, if you say for health sector, or like if you're building hospitals, you can't really compete. Nobody would accept your work unless you're using digital tools and processes and protocols. Okay, if you want to deliver a $1 billion hospital, people expect you to use right technologies and processes, etc. But if you shift to, let's say, schools or like a multi-unit residential, you can't find anything beyond what the actual organization needs to perform at higher quality and lower price without the need for a mandate. Okay? Now, we are very similar, in that sense, to what's happening in the US, the construction industry there, and not similar to what's happening in the UK in that sense. We don't accept a mandate. People say we don't need that type of mandate.
Okay. And then moving on to your more latest work. So you've recently published a paper in Automation and Construction titled The Lifecycle Information Transformation and Exchange. So this is the LITE framework. Would you be able to share with us just if you can quickly overview or summarize it, the LITE framework, what it is, and what are the new findings, or if there are any new findings, what are its applications?
Okay. Now, this paper has published in co-authored with my colleague Eric Poirier from ETS in Quebec. The framework or the paper is to put it in two contexts. One, it is part of the initiative. It is the foundation for Project F, the Integrated Information Project. And if you want more conceptually, it is more a response to the over-standardization of the discussions in our industry. Okay? Any discussion about information management at the moment is a discussion about standards. Standard here, standard there, more standards. Let's standardize this as if standards on their own work.
Yeah.
Standards don't, help improve performance. They are a compliance tool. They don't improve performance. And also standards focus on a specific issue, small issue, and try to resolve it into a certain extent, or they say as very abstract level. Okay. Now, we don't have in our industry a high level framework which looks at information flow and exchange. Okay. And whatever we have been adopted from different industries. You could think of lean, you could think of concurrent engineering, you can think even on agile, but we don't have a framework. Meaning I may be wrong, but based on research done, we really need a new framework that looks at information flow from the inception of an idea of an asset through its natural milestones, and this is very important. Natural deflection points within the how the information flows until it gets until the digital asset becomes a physical asset and it is used and reused. So the framework tries to say, okay, if I want to deliver a physical asset, whatever size, whatever scale, whatever type, whether it's a house, it's a building, or a single pump within a plant room, okay? How does the story start? And what are the milestones the information would flow for that idea to become realized, okay? So that's really the story of the LITE framework. It's a very high-level explanation, or at least exploration of information flow. It is intended to be made less abstract, and I can discuss with you how we're doing this through the initiative, and to deliver decision support systems, and eventually deliver an open, integrated information platform for people to use to manage information flow from the beginning of life to the end of life of an asset.
Okay, that is kind of following this framework, but it's not in any way. Am I understanding it correctly that it's not in any way based around any particular standard that we have at the moment? It's based upon this framework which you have designed together with your colleagues, which is coming from practical experience in industry as well as what the research is saying.
Yes, and to be honest, we should not follow standards when we're developing frameworks. That's the wrong approach to delivering a framework. You deliver a framework based on conceptual basis, based on trying to clarify connections between concepts and trying to deliver a practical solution. Okay, standards are a reference of a framework. The framework should not come and be subservient to a consensus-based standard. A standard is a group of people coming together and saying, this is how we should all work. This is how we should name things. This is how should exchange information. That's the consensus view of a small number of people, however smart they are. Okay. The framework here, at least the way it's presented, is saying, can you disagree with anything in this LITE framework to be inaccurate? It's a challenge. Do you see anything in the flow of information, natural flow of information, to be wrong? I mean, is there possibility for the information to flow in a different way? If yes, please challenge the framework and please contribute to improving it. Very different to a standard, which is more like a imposed structure. Saying this is how you should do it. This is how you should, how exchange information. This is how you should have work in progress published, and I don't know what.
Mm-hmm.
It says gates. You have to define a physical asset. If it's a complex asset, you have to define the digital asset. Then you have to define, the resources needed. And then you have to deliver the digital asset, then your physical asset, and then you go back to the, in cycles. So it's a very different approach to trying to understand the problem, the solutions needed for information management. And then we use standards as a reference to organize the delivery.
But it could equally then turn up into being used by policymakers to refine or redefine some of those very standards that they already have established.
Could be, but that's not the intention. The intention is to make it like any framework from the accurate, precise definition of it is kind of a structure. Okay, so it's of course a knowledge-based structure that you build things around. Okay, the first thing for that structure is to be sound, and this is the first step in publishing it. Saying, is this a sound structure for building an integrated information platform around? Is there something wrong in the premise there? Is it are we missing anything substantial? And once that's there, people can come and say, oh, okay, let's apply it using integrated project delivery. Let's test it. Let's test it using any kind of contractual approach. Let's try to think through this framework in order to help identify requirements for training or learning or information delivery. So that's really the role it wants to play. Maybe people who could take it and play, may it play different roles for different people, but that's what it's intended to generate discussion and organize all these different topics of information management around something we try to call natural, or like it has a natural tendency to it. It's not enforced, it's not mandated, let's say.
Yeah. Okay. Out of that paper, what stood out for me was the discussion around the full, short, and long information loops. So would you be able to just describe or give a little bit of detail about these different types of loops? And then based on that, I will follow up with another question.
Sure. Now, we have to assume for any asset, again, it doesn't matter if it's a skyscraper or a house, a door, doesn't matter, okay? There is a manual way of doing it, and which is excluded by the framework, and a digital way of doing it. Once you're doing something in a digital way, you're using digital means, you have 3 routes to go through the life cycle. One, we call it computer assisted, typically, define the requirements, physical requirements, you define the digital requirements, the people, who's going to deliver it, etc., and until delivery. That's called the full loop or the full cycle, or the long, road. Then you've got, because I'm assuming you're asking about routes rather than loops, but because there's routes and loops, and I don't want to confuse people. When it comes to this shorter route is when the delivering of this asset has been done before, okay, and the resources and methods for delivering it has been already established, okay. So let's say we are delivering a door, manufactured door. The first time we want to deliver it, we have to say, okay, what kind of method should we use? What kind of resources should we apply? What kind of materials, et cetera, et cetera. But once you've done it the first time, you don't have to go through this again because you're repeating it, correct? So here comes the shorter route where you skip defining the resources and methods, okay? And you are directly taking a shorter route, which takes you from physical asset, digital asset, as targeted, to digital asset and physical asset as delivered, okay, without passing through the 2 milestones. And this is really an automation. So really here you're automating something. You're removing something manual from the flow, okay, and you're making it either automated or automatic. It becomes a shorter route. Now, if shorter still route is when we don't really need to define anymore the digital asset, whether as expected or as delivered. And this is where a robot powered by AI can deliver something by saying, build me a bridge that crosses from point A to point B using, steel compound. You don't have to you don't want the system to draw for you a model for it. Okay. You don't really need to define the resources and methods needed. It is autonomous. So it's even a shorter route to go from a required physical asset to a delivered physical asset. Now, this is a very simple, of course, explanation of the routes within the framework. But the idea is any information framework nowadays that does not take account of the possibility of automation and autonomy is a failed framework, to be honest, okay? Because many things we do nowadays, well, I can't believe that in 10 years' time we won't have autonomous cars. It could be much, much shorter than that, know? Yep. So we have to also in our frameworks, because we're planning, these are long-term plans. A framework should be a long-term plan. Should take into account the possibility of automation of specific tasks, activities, and even the delivery of full products. And that's what the framework takes into consideration. Now, the concept of loops is a bit different. The idea is it's taken from the agile method, how things need to be delivered into sprints, etc. And we haven't really expanded on this in this paper, but in a follow-up paper, hopefully we'll follow on that one.
Well, with the discussion on loops, I was wondering, because you were describing the natural occurrence and the way that information flows, perhaps it's right now still unnatural for the information about the building's actual performance to flow back into the hands of the designers and the design tools. How is that taken into account within your framework, and the potential for a knowledge-based feedback loop to the designers or the design systems that will be working autonomously?
Yep. Now, this is one of the things that in our discussion, typically people think about greenfield, projects, but most projects are not greenfield. Okay, it's not always about it's a greenfield. We have to design it, to construct it, operate it. Most projects it would be about already having an asset. You have to redesign it, reconstruct it, reoperate it, etc., etc. Okay. Now, the framework takes into consideration the flow of information from the inception of the idea back into the operation and back again to reuse. That's definitely most important part of the framework, this cyclical nature of information. Now, you tell me, but this is not happening now. The framework's job is not to reflect current situation. You don't go and create a framework and say, this is a framework for how people work now. No, it's a kind of a process. You describe what people work now. But if you want to build for the future and you want to deliver tools for the future, and you want to deliver a platform for integrating information, you say, what are the possibilities of improving the current process so it is more automated and more autonomous? So there is an explicit aim in the framework to encourage automation and encourage autonomy for tasks that can be and need to be automated. There's certain tasks and activities that should not be automated, okay? But for things that need to be automated, there should be an information route for them. It shouldn't be like an exception.
Okay, that's interesting. And with that, I think when you discuss automation and autonomous systems, just like we're seeing in other industries, as you said, in automotive sectors, we will be experiencing the same within the built environment sector. So I suppose that this means the inevitable, which is the potential of displacement for some of the manual work. It means more machine to machine type of communications and actions, and also inevitably the use of AI or machine learning in this instance. So I guess that you may have encountered already through your own work some sort of resistance on this topic, or is it something that people are accepting more openly?
It depends on who you're having a discussion with, I think, and this is not really, something related just to our industry. It's more about how people perceive the role of technology and automation and robotics and AI in our life. If you already have a conservative, or at least you're worried a little bit about the role of AI in society, you would be worried about the role of AI in construction. It's not, it cannot be like disentangled. Okay. To me personally, with some caution, I would say there's nothing to worry about here. Not really. If we are discussing automation or AI, machine learning, deep learning, whatever terminology you would like to, or how much deep you want to go into this topic, we are discussing task activation, automation, and autonomy of things that need to be automated and made autonomous. Okay, it would be wonderful if we say, we need a bridge from, to cross that river. Okay, we wanted to include, 3 lanes for autonomous cars, and we wanted to have this environmental impact, this, carbon footprint, whatever. And something happens, and you wake up, after 1 week, you went out, vacation, you come back, and you find it. Okay, yeah. It's your requirements being dealt with. Okay, automated, delivered at the criteria you define. We're not discussing killer robots here. We're discussing activating and automating, activities that we really want to do. Okay, but we want to do them faster and better. Now, I just want to add one thing. We cannot have, I don't know if you have this term, we can't, have our a cake and eat it too. We can't say we want more efficiency, less waste, better productivity, but no automation. It doesn't work. Either you want more efficiency, which means more better digitalization and better application of tools, processes, and policies to get where you want, or you can't have one not the other. It just doesn't work.
And so, obviously, as you said, it depends on who you're speaking with in the sector that will define their views. But would you agree that overall, our industry as a whole, is it accurate to describe it as the technology laggard? Are we lagging behind?
I disagree with this, self-flogging all the time about, our industry being, laggard, and you all see all these charts about productivity, and you look at that bottom line, this is the construction industry. Everybody is moving so fast, and except us. First, this is not true across the board. It could be true in some countries, not in others. I talk here about Victoria here in Australia, in my state. Construction industry productivity is quite high. Hearing about projects being finished before time, under budget, is normal now, becoming normal. Okay, and also there's one thing highlighted by a researcher, which I can't remember his name. He said something very interesting, like when we say about productivity in construction, when things go to prefabrication, which is really an improvement in productivity, that number moves from the construction industry to manufacturing. So any gains we got in productivity is no longer counted for us. It's now counted for them. Yeah.
Okay, that's a good point, actually, that we effectively are, dissecting, and all of a sudden it's part of a different.
And is it real? I would have ask you: Is the separation between the construction industry and manufacturing industry, which manufacturing for precast, and beams and whatever, is it real, or is it just an academic separation of like a historical way of looking at industries, this is construction and this is manufacturing? And no, it's becoming overlapping. They overlap a lot.
Yeah. Okay, and so in all of this work that you've been conducting around BIM and digitization, what are some of the most widely used or discussed or even observed misconceptions about digitization and the business having to transform itself?
There's so many misconceptions that one doesn't know where to start. But I think the one that really hits home for me, because of the type of work I do, like as a consultant before moving most of things to the open innovation model, is that the conflation or the confusion between compliance approaches and performance approaches. Like, for example, people think they come, and many consultants do the same, say, if you follow this standard, if you follow this guide, you'll be more productive. This doesn't work. This is the stressing compliance of industry with a standard or set of rules, or forcing the discussion to all be the same. Nowadays it's like kind of forced consensus, as if every discussion about our industry or digital transformation must have these terms in it, must include compliance with these documents and these what we think is appropriate. To me, is a disservice. And this is really actually polluting any discussion about performance. You start discussing performance, and people come back to you about compliance, say, all right, if we follow this standard, if we use this classification, should we become better performance? Say no. This is basics. This compliance thing is things you need to comply with if you want to work in a specific market, but you still have to focus on your own performance. So, it's your own performance. So you have to look at your information management, internal practices, how you manage your knowledge, retention rates, your typical business logic that applies with or without standards. But the discussion has moved, and try to tell people, don't be confused with all these discussions. The basics of improving a business are still the same, innovation, retention, etc.
Okay, so there is that. You see that is one of the bigger misconceptions, is this continuous need to adopt the
I could give you
standards
another one.
Irrespective of any sector.
Yeah, technology-based thinking is also problematic, meaning when they think that technology on its own will solve issues.
Yes.
Technology is just an enabler. It allows you to solve a problem. But unless you have the proper process governed by the proper protocol, you won't get where you want to go. So it's always a challenge. And this is also, if you look at it a little bit from a higher level, and you take yourself back 10, 15 years, we had an overemphasis of the importance of technology in performance. Okay, so all discussions were about buying this software, this improving your hardware, etc. And then now there's so much overemphasis on the role of policies, mandates, and standards, and all these things, as if on their own they can change things. What's missed, and this is part of the original framework, is the issue of process. Okay, you cannot benefit from technology and policy improvements without improving process, and getting that message has becoming a little bit harder over time.
Wow! So you're seeing that it's kind of like it's got its own inertia and it's going forward, and now everybody is having a more or less a general consensus, or viewing it more of a policy or a standard related issue.
Consensus is the worst thing in research. It's the worst thing. I mean, we should not have a consensus. We should not try to have a consensus. Okay, the consensus is only important when we are naming something. Okay, or when we say performance of glass should be, measured this way, so that when you give me a number, I know what it means. But there should not be a consensus how we exchange information. The how should never be a consensus based. Should never be formalized, standardized. We should just standardize the end product. Okay, how we name the end product. Okay, and leave the rest for innovation.
Okay, and with that in mind, now we're seeing a new terminology crop up, which is the digital twin. And so, can you comment on this? What are your thoughts on the digital twin phenomenon, we can call it, that we are now seeing being discussed in the built environment? We're lending the term that we've seen used in aviation, in advanced manufacturing, and again, trying to adopt it or apply it within the context of construction and buildings.
Yes, digital twin is actually a regression of the discussion. It's not an improvement of the discussion. We've just moved our discussion back to the early days of discussing BIM. Meaning, of course, there's a new things that we have to take into account of, like IoTs and blockchain and AI or whatever. Okay, but we really have abandoned the whole life cycle approach to focus on the product again. Meaning, the discussion about BIM started with product modeling. Chuck Eastman. Okay. That was where the discussion started. It's it's an important starting point needed. Okay, then slowly the discussion moved about, rather than building information models, to building information modeling, the process. Okay, and for me, so that people don't understand, for me, BIM or BIM building information modeling is not important as a term. We just use it to signify the digital transformation, all the tools and processes and protocols, etc., needed to transform into to become digital by default. Okay, so this digital twin phenomena, as you mentioned, it's a phenomena that needs to be studied. It's a regression. It is not. Now you're seeing people discussing the same thing, exact same thing that we used to discuss 15 and 20 years ago, but now replace BIM and VDC, with these terminology, with digital twin. Soon you will. I follow research, and I have many of my colleagues in the initiative who are really let's say experts in this topic.
Yeah.
But to me is, it's really not a step forward. Soon we'll find people discussing digital twin roles, digital twin certification. Now there's people discussing digital twin frameworks, and and to take you back to the LITE framework on where this fit. Digital twin is just one of 6 couplings. Okay, so when you look at the framework, you see there's different couples. There is the couple between intended deliverable, physical deliverable, and actual physical deliverable. Okay, and you can measure if they're the same, if they're the deviation. There is between needed resources and actual resources. Okay, and there's one between digital assets as delivered and physical assets as delivered. And that's where the digital twin fits, okay? It's just one part of the discussion. I don't understand, and actually I do understand why, but we shouldn't be focusing on such a small part of the overall process and making it as if it's the next best thing. It's the next thing to discuss. It's not the next thing to discuss. It's just part of the discussion.
Do you not see it as a one way of just... is it not just an evolution or an evolving way of using the term BIM?
No, it's a devolution. It's a devolution of the discussion of BIM into smaller parts, because and this is because of what's called saturation. The term BIM has saturated in the markets, and there have been so many discussions and papers and whatever, which and many misplaced ways of mandating BIM, and there was a need for like kind of a fresh start. You see it from a human perspective.
Yes,
Someone thought, okay, this is something new that we could build something around it. We could get new research funds for it. We could, move the discussion forward with it. But as a researcher, you look at it and look at its components. It's only a part of the discussion. It's a smaller part of what we had before. Okay.
Okay, that's interesting. I think that, like you said, right now there is a shift in the discussion to discuss about digital twins, especially even at the policy level. And soon this will again proliferate, and there will be more discussion.
It will be standards.
Yes, correct.
Yes. And then it will be something else in 5 years' time. Okay, that's the problem with doing things without proper research. You decide something and then you add research on top. It doesn't work like that. You don't go and create BIM levels and this is I've been very vocal about it. You don't go and create levels on a napkin, probably, and then build a framework around it and a policy around it and a mandate around it, and then you also disown it at the end. After people followed you and started adopting it, and you mandate it, and then you throw it out. It doesn't work like that. It's unfair for the people who have invested so much energy in following it. And I'm not just discussing about people in the UK. You should, if you're involved in macro adoption and you see the effect of the levels in different countries and how they're taking it to heart as if it's like they must be followed, and they deliver their policies around it and education around it, and you see papers around it and theses, and so many around it, and then it gets thrown out. And now let's focus on something new. And this time it's digital twin. That's not from a human side, and I'm talking as a human researcher. That's not acceptable. That's not acceptable. As a researcher, focusing on data and the concepts, I think also it's not acceptable. Why this shift? How do you justify it? Because you want to move the industry, because this is an industry level discussion. Okay, why should we now believe that this discussion about digital twins will not end up like the discussion about levels?
Yes, yeah. It seems like this is like a progression, according to the policymakers, that this is a progression into the IoT domain to make sense of connectivity, to make sense of the integration with sensors, that this is kind of the next step or stepping stone. And of course, we're also seeing technology providers kind of pivot their own marketing and sales into that direction, with the products that were previously classed as BIM are now being pivoted into the digital twin.
And you've seen it also on common data environments, and you've seen any terminology that you build, so much policy around. Okay, somebody will use that term not in an intended way. Okay, you have to be very careful when we focus on a specific terminology, on a specific term, a specific set of concepts without putting them in a general framework. Okay, IoTs are important. Blockchain is important. Artificial intelligence is important. They're all concepts that could apply without creating a new top-level term that we build research around and we build policy around. We have to incorporate them. We need a framework that incorporates them. I'm 100% with that. But we should not create branding. We should not create something which just looks fresh. When you look at it inside, it's the same components. Just change. Look at any discussion now. Look at papers. Okay, there's of course some new things because of IoTs and AI, but if you remove these, you'll find it's the same discussion. Same discussion. Just change the label.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we do have exemplars of digital twinning at the physical component basis, which becomes important in very specific engineering tasks, but that goes into the actual physical properties of the engineered product, be it, which we're talking about a very, very high.
It's a product level.
Yes.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, when discussing products or end product, whether it's a building or a pump or what, doesn't matter if you have a digital physical, I call it coupling, and we use the term coupling in our framework because coupling could be multiple levels, and you can couple and decouple, and extent of it has a very different like a staged approach. But what you just mentioned is a valid and needed discussion about twins or couples between digital and physical, and it's component of the general discussion, making it the feature show, making it the top discussion for a strategy or a policy. This is where I think we are moving from research to be honest, positioning and marketing and such.
Okay. Well, that's again another interesting point of view that I've come across. Many in industry state the same, that the term that I've heard is that we're trying to run before we can walk, that the industry itself is still trying to make sense of BIM, and now it's witnessing a new terminology, as you mentioned, being discussed wholly across the industry. Some are excited about it as well. As you see, there is something fresh and something new to inject into those older ideas. But still, I am hearing a lot of discussion around from the industry side saying that this is too soon or too fast and something that hasn't yet been properly researched.
Again, I would say it's not too soon, it's not too fast. It's unnecessary. It's not that we have to go to digital twins eventually. This is not a target. To me, as a researcher in this domain, I'm not a specialist. I'm not a specialist in anything. Okay? I'm just thinking through these problems. It is part of digital transformation to have these digital physical couples. That's it. How do you improve the coupling or the twinning? That's a discussion, a specialized discussion. So people could specialize in twinning, digital twins, write papers about it, whatever. But on its own, it doesn't make any sense unless it's within the larger framework of design, construction, operation again and again. We cannot just continuously take a small portion of the information life cycle and make it the biggest space. We cannot just focus on policy and forget technology. Focus on technology and forget policy. Where's the process here? We have to think holistically because it's a holistic problem. We can't keep, subdividing this and adding labels and.
Okay, so I think that that was I mean, we've covered a lot of different topics, but now perhaps another question, which is in light of the current situation that we're in with the pandemic, and obviously this has had a great impact on our built environment, on construction sites, and we're not entirely sure what the future holds as well. So do you foresee that this might somehow slow down or inhibit the already ongoing digital transformations within the sector?
It may be the opposite effect. Meaning, I'm an optimist here. Meaning, we always try to convince people that they should adopt digital by default. So the default action should be digital. If you cannot do it digitally, you do it manually if you want. Okay. The default position is autonomy. Make things autonomous. If you cannot do it, you do it. Make it automatic or manual. Okay. This, sad, health crisis we're all passing through, and it's a global event, has accelerated our understanding of importance of digital. Okay. Digital for learning, digital for delivery, digital performance. So maybe there's a silver lining around all this misery, that maybe we'll get out of this, at least from a productivity perspective, to have more urgency of trying to resolve our digital information flows. So maybe it's a positive thing in that side, of course, with all the sadness around it.
Yeah, that's certainly something I've also come across, is that now that there is let's say, less labor on site and less staff as a whole within the office, there is actually a need to automate some of the tasks because of just the sheer lack of number of workers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
yes.
And finally, for anybody that's aspiring to do research within this industry as a whole, in all of your experience, is there any kind of like golden nuggets of truth or some kind of advice that you would want to give to other researchers that are trying to make an impact within the sector?
Now, when we say research, it's very important to define who we mean, because in our initiative, we consider a researcher anyone who commits with passion and uses the right knowledge tools to understand, explain, describe, predict a problem. So they don't have to be like professional researchers working in academia. A researcher you have the best researchers coming from industry sometimes. It doesn't have to be, coming from academia. For aspiring researchers, young researchers, which we have quite a lot of them within the initiative, and they are the bedrock of what we do, the advice is to follow your passion and only do research in things that you're passionate about. So it's a basic message. Don't follow anything that shines in research. This is a big problem. And I don't mean anyone in specific, but really, you don't find good research if you always shift your focus to the newest thing in town. You don't go and, research contracts, and then you go into, IoTs, and then from IoTs you go to AI. And don't be that type of researcher. Find a problem that you're really passionate about, you're really confused about, you really care about solving. Learn the tools of the trade for research, the rigor, all the methodologies, and apply yourself to finding that solution. Most importantly, never do research for research's sake. Never do it for that. We have to deliver something practical. It doesn't have to be like you do a research and the practical thing comes in 1 year, or 6 months. It could be the practical thing comes in 5 years and 10 years, but you should put it at, front and center what you're doing. How would my research benefit society, the environment, etc., and start with that end in mind and build your research around it. And my final one would say, work in a community. I know it's self-serving here, but try as much as you can to work with, within communities that think and have the same passion like you. Try not to become part of an institution too quickly. Okay. As a young researcher, you have to be very careful of how you think and not to be affected by bureaucratic ways of thinking about research. Try to be as independent as you can, even if you're working within an institution. Keep your independence, disagree with everything until proven correct, and you just use your critical thinking to find solutions for problems. Even if people tell you that this is the solution and everybody agrees with the solution, do not accept it. Try to find your own way.
That's great advice. And then where could our listeners find out more about your work? Where would they be able to quickly find some more resources from your recent publications and other initiatives?
The work I do is now mixed with the work of others. It's no longer my work. It's now becoming our work. If you're concerned only for peer-reviewed research, you can find have a blog called BIMframework.info, which is all models generated is there. But for our combined work, which provides much, much more value than just my work, you go to bimexcellence.org. BIMexcellence.org will identify these projects I mentioned, will identify like the dictionary, the resources you can download and use on your own under Creative Commons. So BIMexcellence.org will take you everywhere related to the discussion about information management, performance improvement, and knowledge management that we cover.
Thank you for tuning in to listen to Beyond BIM podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more from our latest episodes, then you can visit Beyond BIM, which is available on SoundCloud and iTunes and all the other major podcast providers.